Welcome to the program. Hello, I'm Airlie Ward. The Tasmanian Government is being asked to apologise for its role in forced adoptions from the 1950s to the 1970s. It follows the tabling of a report in Federal Parliament recommending all governments and institutions apologise for the practice, without any caveat that it was part of the culture of the time. For many women, it was an emotional end to a traumatic part of Australian history that saw thousands of mothers pressured and coerced into signing adoption papers as part of state-sanctioned policies. Fiona Breen talked to 3 Tasmanian mothers who have lived with the emotional scars ever since. Even now, 40 years on, they recall the trauma as if it was yesterday.
There's laughter and smiles as 3 friends swap stories and photographs of themselves as teenagers in the late 1960s.
I think it was a big period of change. I think Woodstock had happened, Jermaine Greer was in the news. I was working at 16. I'd done really well at school but didn't want to continue. But yeah, it was just a much freer time than the 50s, where gloves and petticoats were still the norm.
Little did they know at the time their newfound freedom was precarious.
Elvis Presley, rock and roll, the Beatles, and we didn't want to be like our parents. You know, why should we? But living in the country, you couldn't do much about it.
All 3 came together only recently. 40 years ago, they had their lives turned upside down when, as teenagers, they became pregnant. They're still trying to come to terms with the consequences.
I had a job. You know, I was earning money, but I was just disgraced, and my family were disgraced.
There were homes and hospitals for unmarried mothers, including the Salvation Army's Elam Maternity Hospital in West Hobart.
I came to Elam. My mother said to me, if you bring the little bastard home, the cat will lie on its face, and when they cut the little bastard open, the only thing they'll find is cat hairs in its lungs. So there was no options.
Over 40 years, 2,000 unmarried mothers gave birth at Elam, and their babies were adopted. The same was happening in institutions across Australia. Virginia Perry was sent to a Catholic-run home for unmarried mothers in Sydney.
Certainly where I was, it was just a baby mill. They were just churning the babies out and adopting them out as quick as they could. And there was no options. You weren't given an option.
Recently, the women gave evidence at the Hobart hearings of the Parliamentary Senate inquiry into forced adoption. They were among many across Australia giving emotional testimony about traumatic labours, cold and hard hospital staff, and heartbreaking forced separations from their babies.
When I went into labour at Elam, they told me to stop whinging and take 2 Aspro. Then they put me in stirrups, what for I don't know, because all I wanted to do was squat, and left the room.
Over 40 years, thousands of unmarried mothers across Australia had their babies taken away in state-sanctioned adoptions. Most say they had little or no option.
As soon as my baby was born, I asked to see her, and they said no. I asked if I'd had a boy or girl, and they refused to tell me. I think it was about 3 days before somebody would tell me that I had a girl. And every day I begged to see my baby, and every day they said no.
Those working in the system at the time say all unmarried mothers were given options to keep the babies. But the inquiry heard evidence from women who recalled feeling drugged, fragile and coerced into signing adoption documents. Others believe the documents were signed illegally by hospital staff.
There was no legal counsel and there was no social counsel either.
Did you know you could change your mind?
I was told I had 30 days, but nothing was said about what to do within those 30 days. But my parents conveniently took me out of the state for that month, so I couldn't do anything. And since then, with the records I've got, I found out she was gone and in New Guinea within 2 weeks, which surely must have been illegal.
Robin Cohen had her daughter at the Royal Hobart Hospital. She recalls vividly the trauma of signing adoption papers.
Do you feel you were coerced to sign that document?
Absolutely. I didn't know when. I never asked to sign the adoption papers. They came to my bed, they led me down the corridor. I had a medical condition which made it incredibly difficult for me to walk. I was sat in a room with people staring at me and I was told to sign the papers. I started to cry, I started to sob. They just kept going.
7 years ago, Robin Cohen started having counselling, 40 years after her baby was taken away. More recently, she's been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. She spoke publicly about her experiences for the first time at the Senate inquiry.
I felt ashamed and guilty, and I never spoke about my child because I was so ashamed of myself. And it's only in the last few years that my emotions came to the surface and I couldn't deal with what was happening, and I finally had to deal with the trauma.
For Virginia Perry and Chris Burke, the pain has been softened a little by successful reunions with their firstborn, but it hasn't been easy.
I met her when she was 16.
So how did that go? Because I understand it hasn't been good for everybody.
It was rough to start off with, and then it got a bit rougher, and then things calmed down for a while and then they go rough again. But she's very happy now.
There are always regrets, though, about lost years.
All of her baby years have gone. And there's no getting that back. And that bond, that special bond, when you have kids, you know you have that bond. And that's been broken. And her spirit's been broken, and so has mine.
In Canberra this week, Robin Cohen joined 100 other women for this week's tabling in Parliament of the Senate report on forced adoptions. There were tears all round.
I personally was just holding my breath and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I couldn't believe that somebody had listened to my story, had believed my story, and were validating my story, and were acknowledging that it was uncontrovertible that forced adoption was common.
She's welcomed the report's 20 recommendations. They include medical and financial support for victims and unqualified formal apologies for adoptions that were often illegal. Robin Cohen says it's now time for the Tasmanian Government to apologise.
It happened in their hospital, in their public hospital. It's time to acknowledge this and don't sweep it under the carpet. It's been proved.
In a statement, the Premier Lara Giddings says the government needs time to consider the report's recommendations before making further comment, but she sympathises with the mothers who felt they were pressured or otherwise encouraged to give up their newborn children for adoption.